Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The morning sun cast deceptive diamonds across the Atlantic as the merchant vessel Providence cut through the gentle swells off the Virginia coast. Isabella Whitmore stood at the ship's rail, her dark hair whipping in the salt breeze as she watched dolphins dance in their wake. At 22, she possessed the kind of serene beauty that came from inner conviction rather than vanity. Warm brown eyes that saw goodness even in darkness and a smile that could calm storms in human hearts. "Miss Whitmore, you shouldn't stand so close to the edge," called Thomas, the young sailor who had appointed himself her unofficial guardian during the voyage from Boston to Charleston. Isabella's mission was one of mercy, bringing medical supplies and teaching materials to an orphanage established by her church, carrying hope to children who had none. "I'm perfectly safe, Thomas," Isabella replied, her voice carrying the soft cadence of New England education. "Besides, God's creation is too beautiful to admire from a distance." She gestured toward the endless expanse of blue, where seabirds wheeled and dove in their eternal hunt. It was impossible to imagine danger in such tranquil perfection. That illusion shattered when the lookout's terrified cry pierced the morning air. Ship approaching fast off the starboard bow, black flag flying. Isabella's blood turned to ice as she followed the lookout's pointing finger. A sleek vessel was cutting through the waves toward them with predatory grace, its dark sails billowing like the wings of some enormous bird of prey. Even at a distance, she could see the gleam of cannon muzzles and the flash of steel in the hands of the crew swarming its deck. "Pirates," whispered Thomas, his face gone pale as parchment. "We're done for." Captain Reynolds appeared beside them, his weathered face grim with the knowledge of what was coming. The Providence was a merchant vessel, built for cargo rather than speed or warfare. Against a purpose-built predator like the ship bearing down on them, they had as much chance as a lamb against a wolf pack. "All passengers below deck immediately," Reynolds commanded, but his voice lacked hope. They all knew that hiding would only delay the inevitable. Isabella remained frozen at the rail, watching their doom approach with a strange fascination. She had read accounts of piracy in newspapers and heard whispered stories in drawing rooms, but she had never imagined herself facing such a reality. As the distance closed, she could make out individual figures on the attacking vessel, armed men moving with deadly purpose, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats and bandanas. The attack came with brutal efficiency. Grappling hooks flew across the narrowing gap between ships, followed by boarding planks that bridged the divide like instruments of judgment. The first pirates to board moved like dancers in a choreographed ballet of violence, cutting down anyone who offered resistance with cold precision. Isabella found herself pressed against the mainmast, too terrified to move as chaos erupted around her. The few armed crew members of the Providence fell quickly, their blood staining the deck she had walked so peacefully just moments before. Passengers screamed and pleaded, but their appeals for mercy fell on deaf ears. Then she saw him. The pirate captain stepped aboard the Providence like he was taking possession of something that had always belonged to him. He was tall and lean, moving with the fluid grace of a man equally at home on a ship's deck or a battlefield. His long black coat billowed behind him, and twin pistols gleamed at his hips. But it was his face that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. Sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the cruel twist of his mouth and eyes the color of winter storms, cold and utterly without mercy. He surveyed the carnage with the detached interest of a man inspecting livestock, his gaze passing over cowering passengers like they were less than human. When those storm-gray eyes fell on Isabella, she felt as if she were being measured for a coffin. "Captain Blackwood," one of his men reported. "The cargo hold is full of medical supplies and books, nothing of real value." Blackwood. Isabella had heard that name whispered in fearful tones in port towns up and down the coast. Captain Marcus Blackwood, sometimes called the Devil of the Carolinas, was said to be the most ruthless Corsair sailing American waters. Ships that encountered his vessel rarely lived to tell the tale, and those that did spoke of a man without conscience or soul. "Disappointing," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of education gone wrong, "but not entirely without profit. Search the passengers for anything valuable, then prepare to scuttle this floating coffin." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as pirates began roughly searching the surviving passengers, taking jewelry, coin purses, and anything else that caught their fancy. An elderly man pleaded for his late wife's wedding ring, only to receive a vicious blow that sent him sprawling across the deck. "Please," Isabella found herself saying, the word escaping before she could stop it. "He's an old man. That ring is all he has left of his beloved." The sudden silence that fell over the deck was more terrifying than the previous chaos. Every eye turned toward Isabella, including Blackwood's penetrating stare. She realized with growing horror that she had drawn the attention of the most dangerous man present. Blackwood approached her with slow, deliberate steps like a cat stalking a wounded bird. Up close, Isabella could see the network of scars that mapped his face and hands, evidence of a life lived at the edge of violence. He stopped just close enough that she could smell the salt and gunpowder that clung to his clothes. "And what?" he asked softly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout. "Makes you think your opinion matters to me, little church mouse?" Isabella's courage wavered under his intimidating presence, but something deep inside her, the same faith that had brought her on this mission of mercy, refused to let her back down, because mercy costs you nothing, while cruelty diminishes your soul. A collective gasp went up from the watching pirates and passengers alike. No one spoke to Captain Blackwood that way and lived to regret it. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Isabella was certain she was about to die. Instead, Blackwood threw back his head and laughed, a sound devoid of humor that sent chills racing down Isabella's spine. "My soul? Little dove, that commodity was sold long ago for a price you couldn't comprehend." He gestured to one of his men who immediately stepped forward. "Take the ring and anything else of value. As for our idealistic passenger," his cold gaze returned to Isabella, studying her with the intensity of a predator deciding whether prey was worth the effort of the hunt. "She'll be coming with us." "No." Thomas stepped forward, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt. "You can't take her." Blackwood's pistol appeared in his hand with snake-quick speed. The barrel pressed against Thomas's forehead before the young sailor could draw breath. "I can take whatever I please, boy. The only question is whether you'll die trying to stop me, or live with the knowledge that you couldn't." Isabella placed a gentle hand on Thomas's arm, feeling the tremor of rage and helplessness that ran through him. "It's all right," she said softly, though her own voice shook with terror. "Don't throw your life away for mine." Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly, as if her compassion for the young sailor was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Wise advice. Perhaps there's more to you than religious platitudes and moral preaching." He holstered his pistol and nodded to his crew. "Take what we came for and prepare to depart. Bring the girl." As an afterthought, he tossed a small leather pouch at the old man's feet. "Consider that payment for the ring, grandfather. More generosity than I usually show." Isabella was roughly seized by two pirates and dragged toward the rail where boarding planks connected the ships. As she was forced across the gap, she caught one last glimpse of the Providence. Thomas watching helplessly, passengers huddled in terror, and Captain Reynolds with blood streaming from a head wound. Then she was aboard Blackwood's ship, surrounded by men who looked at her like she was either a valuable prize or an unwelcome burden. The vessel beneath her feet was a predator built for speed and warfare. Every line of its construction spoke of deadly purpose, from the gleaming cannons to the razor-sharp cutlasses hanging from the rigging. This was no merchant ship or honest naval vessel, but a weapon designed to bring death and destruction to the innocent. "Welcome aboard the Retribution," Blackwood said, appearing beside her as his crew secured the ship for departure. "I trust you'll find your accommodations educational." Isabella looked back at the Providence, already growing smaller as the pirate ship pulled away. She realized with growing despair that her mission of mercy had become something far different. She was now at the mercy of a man who seemed to have none to give. As the Retribution caught the wind and surged forward into the endless blue, Isabella whispered a prayer for strength and courage. She had sought to bring hope to orphaned children, but now found herself in desperate need of hope herself. Whatever lay ahead in the company of Captain Blackwood and his crew, she would face it with the same faith that had brought her this far, even if it killed her. The cell they threw Isabella into was little more than a storage compartment in the ship's belly, reeking of tar and stagnant water. A single porthole provided dim light and a view of endless ocean that served as a constant reminder of how far she was from any hope of rescue. The Retribution rolled with the Atlantic swells, and Isabella fought waves of nausea as she tried to find some position of comfort on the rough wooden floor. Hours passed before anyone came to check on her. When the door finally creaked open, Isabella expected one of the rough sailors she had seen during the attack. Instead, A boy who couldn't be more than 14 peered around the doorframe, carrying a tin plate and a cup of water. "Captain says you're to eat," the boy mumbled, not meeting her eyes. His clothes were too large for his thin frame, and Isabella noticed how his hands shook as he set down the meager meal. "What's your name?" Isabella asked gently, recognizing fear when she saw it. The boy glanced nervously toward the door. "Jamie, miss, but I ain't supposed to talk to you." Isabella studied his young face, seeing something that surprised her. This wasn't the hardened criminal she expected to find aboard a pirate vessel. "How long have you been on this ship, Jamie?" 2 months, miss." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They took me when they raided a fishing village. Said I could work or die." The casual cruelty of forcing a child into piracy made Isabella's stomach turn, but she kept her voice calm. "Have you tried to leave?" Jamie's laugh was bitter beyond his years. "Where would I go? We're always at sea, and Captain Blackwood, he don't forgive deserters." Before Isabella could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Jamie's face went white with terror, and he scrambled toward the door. "I have to go. Don't tell him we talked, please." The boy vanished just as Captain Blackwood filled the doorway. In the confined space, his presence seemed even more intimidating than it had on deck. He studied Isabella with those cold gray eyes, taking in her disheveled appearance and the untouched food. "Not hungry?" he asked, stepping into the cell. "That's unfortunate. Meals aboard the Retribution are irregular at best." Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze. "I find it difficult to eat when children are being held against their will." Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. "You've been talking to young Jamie. I warned him about that. Don't punish him for showing basic human kindness," Isabella said quickly. "If you must punish someone, punish me." "Kindness?" Blackwood's laugh was harsh. "There's no kindness on this ship, only survival. The boy understands that better than most." Isabella rose to her feet, steadying herself against the ship's movement. "He's a child. Whatever crimes you've committed, he doesn't deserve to pay for them." For a moment, Blackwood's mask of cruel indifference slipped, and Isabella caught a glimpse of something raw beneath. Pain, perhaps, or regret. But it vanished so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "You know nothing about what anyone aboard this ship deserves," he said quietly, but there was less venom in his voice than before. "Jamie chose survival over death. It's a choice many have faced in these waters." "And what choice did you face?" Isabella asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What made you become this?" Blackwood's eyes went flat and dangerous. "That, my dear captive, is none of your concern." He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "I suggest you eat. Tomorrow you'll learn what it means to be useful aboard a pirate vessel." As his footsteps faded, Isabella sank back to the floor, her heart racing. She had glimpsed something in Blackwood's eyes when she mentioned Jamie. A crack in his armor of cruelty. It wasn't much, but it was enough to kindle a dangerous hope. The night brought dreams of home and family, interrupted by the sounds of the ship at work. Creaking timbers shouted orders, and the eternal whisper of water against the hull. When morning came, Isabella was roused by Jamie, who brought another meal and cast nervous glances over his shoulder. "Captain wants to see you on deck," he whispered. "Best not keep him waiting." Isabella followed the boy through narrow corridors and up steep stairs until they emerged into brilliant sunlight. The Retribution was magnificent in the morning light, all clean lines and efficient purpose. But Isabella's admiration died when she saw what awaited her. The crew had assembled on deck in a rough circle, their faces eager with anticipation. In the center of that circle, a man knelt with his hands bound behind his back. Isabella recognized him as one of the sailors from the Providence. Somehow he had been taken prisoner along with her. "Ah, our guest of honor arrives," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying easily across the deck. "Perfect timing. We were just about to begin the morning's entertainment." Isabella's blood turned to ice as she realized what was about to happen. "No, please don't do this." Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "This man tried to hide a purse of gold coins from my crew. On this ship, theft is punishable by death." He drew his pistol with casual grace. "Unless, of course, our moral compass has an alternative suggestion." All eyes turned to Isabella, and she felt the weight of an impossible choice crushing down upon her. Save one man and possibly doom herself, or remain silent and watch innocent blood spill on the deck beneath her feet. "I'll take his punishment," she heard herself say. "Let him live, and I'll accept whatever consequences you think fit." The crew murmured in surprise, and Blackwood's eyebrows rose. Interesting. And what makes you think your life is worth more than his? It isn't, Isabella replied firmly. But mercy is always worth more than vengeance. For a long moment, Blackwood studied her face as if searching for signs of deception or fear. Then, to everyone's amazement, he holstered his pistol. Very well. The man lives. He nodded to his crew, who hauled the prisoner to his feet. Lock him in the hold. As for you, his gaze returned to Isabella, unreadable and intense. You've just volunteered for the most dangerous job on this ship. Welcome to your new role as my conscience. The word sent a chill through Isabella that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. She had saved one life, but in doing so, she had bound herself to a man whose conscience seemed as black as the ocean depths. As the crew dispersed and the saved sailor was led away, Blackwood approached her with measured steps. Tell me, little dove, he said softly, do you really believe you can change a devil back into a man? Isabella met his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I believe everyone deserves the chance to choose redemption over damnation. Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. Then you're about to learn just how far the damned can fall. Being Captain Blackwood's conscience proved to be the most exhausting and terrifying job Isabella had ever imagined. Over the following weeks, she was summoned to witness every decision of consequence, every moment where mercy might compete with cruelty. Blackwood seemed determined to test the limits of her moral conviction, presenting her with impossible choices that had no clear right answers. The first real test came when they encountered a Spanish merchant vessel loaded with silver from the colonies. Isabella stood beside Blackwood on the quarterdeck as the Retribution closed in on its prey, her hands gripping the rail so tightly her knuckles were white. Standard raid, Blackwood announced to his crew, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man discussing the weather. Take the silver, sink the ship, leave no witnesses. The last part hit Isabella like a physical blow. You can't murder innocent sailors for doing their job. Blackwood turned to her with that cold smile she had come to dread. Can't I? They're enemies of the crown I serve, carrying wealth stolen from natives who never consented to Spanish rule. Their deaths serve a greater justice. Isabella stared at him, seeing the carefully constructed justification for what she knew was simple piracy. You don't serve any crown except your own greed. Perhaps, Blackwood conceded, signaling his crew to prepare for attack. But tell me, my moral compass, what alternative do you propose? Let them sail away to report our position to every naval patrol in these waters? The question trapped Isabella in another impossible dilemma. She watched the Spanish ship drawing closer, seeing sailors on its deck going about their daily routines, unaware that death was approaching under black sails. Among them, she spotted a young man about Jamie's age, laughing at something his crewmate had said. Take their cargo and leave them stranded, she said desperately. Disable their ship but don't sink it. Let them live to find rescue. Blackwood studied her face with intense curiosity. And if they die of exposure or thirst before rescue arrives? Does that absolve you of their deaths? Isabella felt the weight of impossible responsibility crushing down on her, but she forced herself to stand firm. At least they would have a chance. Murder offers none. To her amazement, Blackwood actually considered her words. For long moments he stared across the water at their intended victim, his expression unreadable. Finally he turned to his first mate. Disable their rudder and take their water barrels along with the silver, he commanded. Leave them food for 3 days and fire a signal shot every hour until we're out of sight. Someone will come looking for a Spanish treasure ship. The crew looked confused by the unusual orders, but they followed them without question. Isabella watched in relief as the raid proceeded with unprecedented restraint. The Spanish sailors were roughly handled but not killed. Their ship was plundered but not destroyed, and they were left with genuine hope of survival. As the Retribution sailed away from the disabled vessel, Blackwood approached Isabella with an expression she couldn't decipher. Satisfied with your moral victory? Why did you listen to me? Isabella asked, genuinely puzzled. Blackwood was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been confusion. I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps I was curious to see if mercy truly costs nothing, as you claimed. That night, Isabella was moved from her cell to a small cabin near the captain's quarters. It was sparse but clean, with a real bed and a writing desk. Jamie brought her dinner and lingered nervously by the door. The crew's talking, he whispered. They say you're changing the captain. Some think it's witchcraft. Isabella's blood chilled. What do you think, Jamie? The boy considered her question seriously. I think maybe you remind him of someone he used to be. Before what? Jamie glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. Before they killed his family. Before he became the devil of the Carolinas. The revelation hit Isabella like a cannon blast. His family? His wife and daughter. Jamie continued in hushed tones. Spanish raiders attacked his plantation when he was away. When he came home, he found... Jamie shuddered. That's when he turned pirate. Been hunting Spanish ships ever since, claiming it's for the crown. But everyone knows it's for revenge. Isabella felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Blackwood's educated manner, his knowledge of naval tactics, the way he carried himself like a gentleman despite his brutal profession. He hadn't been born to piracy. Something had driven him to it. How do you know all this? She asked. Old Sam told me. He was with the captain before when he was respectable. Says the captain used to be the kindest man you'd ever meet, until the world showed him what kindness gets you. After Jamie left, Isabella sat alone in her cabin, staring out at the moonlit ocean and trying to reconcile this new information with the cruel man she had come to know. A grieving husband and father, driven mad by loss and seeking vengeance against an entire nation. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them in a way that made her heart ache. The next morning brought another test of her influence. A sail was spotted on the horizon, and as it drew closer, Isabella recognized the flag of the British Navy. Her heart leaped with hope. Rescue, at last. But that hope died when she saw Blackwood's reaction. Royal Navy frigate, he announced to his crew, his voice filled with anticipation. Probably carrying dispatches and gold for the colonial governors. Shall we introduce ourselves? Isabella stared at him in horror. That's a warship. Your own country's warship. You can't attack it. Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. I hold a letter of marque from His Majesty, authorizing me to attack enemy vessels. Unfortunately, I've been known to make mistakes about which ships are enemies. The casual way he spoke of treason made Isabella's stomach turn. Those men served the same king you claim to serve. How can you even consider it? Because kings are far away, and dead men tell no tales about letters of marque that may or may not be authentic. Blackwood signaled his crew to prepare for battle. Besides, the Royal Navy has done precious little to protect innocent families from Spanish raiders. Perhaps it's time they learned what helplessness feels like. Isabella realized she was witnessing the moment when Blackwood's quest for vengeance would transform him from privateer to outright pirate. Once he attacked a British warship, there would be no going back, no pretense of serving any cause greater than his own rage. If you do this, she said quietly, you'll prove that you're exactly the monster everyone believes you to be. Your wife and daughter wouldn't want you to become this. Blackwood went perfectly still, his hand frozen on his sword hilt. The mention of his family had hit its mark, and Isabella could see the internal war playing out across his features. Don't, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Speak of them. Why not? Isabella stepped closer, despite the danger radiating from him. Because you know they wouldn't recognize the man you've become? Because you know that your quest for vengeance has already cost you your soul? The crew watched in tense silence, as their captain and his unlikely conscience faced each other on the quarterdeck. Blackwood's eyes blazed with fury and pain, and for a moment Isabella thought he might strike her down where she stood. Instead, he turned away abruptly. Change course, he commanded his crew. We'll avoid the frigate. A collective sigh of relief went up from the crew, though Isabella noticed several disappointed faces among them. As the Retribution altered course to avoid the British warship, Blackwood disappeared into his cabin without another word. That evening, Isabella found him on deck, staring out at the stars with a bottle of rum in his hand. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of his choices had finally begun to crush him. You think you're saving me? He said without looking at her. But some men are too far gone for salvation. Isabella moved to stand beside him at the rail. I think you're afraid to hope. Hope means you might have to forgive yourself, and that's the hardest thing any of us can do. Blackwood finally looked at her, and in the moonlight she could see tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. You don't understand what I've done, what I've become. I understand that you're still choosing mercy when it matters most, Isabella replied gently. That has to count for something. For the first time since she had been captured, Blackwood's expression held no cruelty, no calculation, only the raw pain of a man who had lost everything and was slowly learning to live with the consequences. "My compass," he murmured so quietly she almost missed it. "Perhaps that's exactly what you are." The transformation didn't happen overnight. In the weeks following their confrontation over the British frigate, Isabella watched Blackwood wage an internal war between the monster he had become and the man he used to be. Some days mercy won. Other days the old cruelty reasserted itself with vengeance. But slowly, incrementally, something fundamental was shifting in the soul of the Devil of the Carolinas. The final test came when they encountered a Spanish galleon limping toward port with a broken mainmast and obvious battle damage. As the Retribution approached, Isabella could see that the ship was helpless, its crew struggling to keep it afloat. It would be the easiest prey Blackwood had ever taken. "Spanish colors," his first mate reported eagerly. "She's heavy in the water with cargo and can't run or fight." Isabella felt her heart sink as she watched Blackwood study the disabled vessel through his spyglass. This was exactly the kind of ship that had changed his life forever. Spanish, vulnerable, and carrying the wealth of a colonial empire built on suffering. Everything in his past screamed for vengeance. "Captain?" the first mate pressed. "Your orders?" Blackwood lowered the spyglass, his expression unreadable. Isabella held her breath, knowing that this moment would define not just his future, but her own understanding of whether redemption was truly possible for someone who had fallen so far. "Signal the Spanish ship," Blackwood commanded. "Offer assistance with repairs." The crew stared at their captain in stunned silence. Several men exchanged glances that clearly questioned his sanity. Isabella felt tears of relief sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't over yet. "Sir?" the first mate stammered. "Offer assistance?" "You heard me." Blackwood's voice carried absolute authority. "They're sailors in distress. We helped them reach port safely." The next few hours were surreal as the crew of the Retribution worked alongside their traditional enemies to repair the damaged galleon. Isabella watched Blackwood direct the rescue effort with the same intensity he had once brought to raids, and she realized she was witnessing the emergence of the man he had been before tragedy twisted him into something else. When the repairs were complete and the Spanish ship was seaworthy again, their captain came aboard the Retribution to offer thanks. He was an older man with kind eyes, and Isabella noticed how his gaze lingered on a miniature portrait he carried of his own family. "Captain Blackwood," the Spaniard said in careful English, "you have shown mercy where we expected none." "Why?" Blackwood glanced at Isabella, then back at the Spanish captain. "Because someone reminded me that mercy costs nothing, while cruelty diminishes the soul." As the Spanish ship sailed away safely, Blackwood's crew gathered around him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright mutiny. Isabella realized that his moment of redemption might cost him everything he had built as a pirate captain. "Explain this, Captain," his first mate demanded. "We could have taken enough gold to set us up for life." "Gold is temporary," Blackwood replied calmly. "But honor, once lost, is nearly impossible to recover." "Honor?" One of the crew spat. "What honor is there in piracy?" Blackwood looked around at the faces of men who had followed him into darkness, and Isabella saw him make a decision that would change all their lives. "None, which is why we're no longer pirates." The declaration hit like a thunderbolt. Men who had lived by violence and theft for years stared at their captain as if he had declared himself the King of England. "What are you saying?" the first mate asked. "I'm saying that any man who wishes to continue this life is free to leave at the next port. As for me, I have a letter of marque that makes me a legitimate privateer. It's time I started acting like one." Isabella felt her heart soar as she realized what Blackwood was offering. Not just his own redemption, but a chance for every man aboard to choose a different path. Some would take it, others wouldn't, but the choice would be theirs. As the sun set that evening, Isabella found Blackwood standing alone at the bow, watching the endless horizon with something approaching peace in his expression. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He turned to her with a smile that transformed his entire face. Not the cruel twist she had come to know, but something warm and genuine that reminded her of the man he must have been before loss broke him. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe," he said. "You were right about mercy costing nothing. What I didn't understand was how much vengeance was costing me." Isabella moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What happens now?" Now we sail to Charleston and I turn myself in to the colonial authorities. I'll face trial for my crimes, but at least I'll face it as a man, not a monster. Isabella's heart clenched at the thought of losing him just as she had found the good man hidden beneath the pirate's exterior. And, if they hang you? Blackwood reached out to touch her face with surprising gentleness. Then I'll die knowing that someone believed I was worth saving. That's more than I deserved and more than I ever hoped for. Isabella covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses earned through years of violence and the tremor of a man learning to be vulnerable again. You deserve a chance at the happiness you lost. We both do. Is that what you want? Blackwood asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of wind and waves. A chance with a reformed pirate who may not live to see another year? Isabella looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw not the devil of the Carolinas, but Marcus Blackwood, a man who had lost everything, fallen into darkness, and clawed his way back to the light with her help. I want a chance with the man who chose mercy over vengeance, she said firmly. Whatever comes after that, we'll face together. When Blackwood kissed her, it was with the desperate tenderness of a man who had forgotten what hope felt like. Isabella tasted salt air and new beginnings, the promise of storms weathered and calm seas ahead. As the retribution sailed toward an uncertain future, Isabella realized that her mission of mercy had succeeded in ways she never could have imagined. She had set out to bring hope to orphan children and instead had rescued the soul of a man who had lost himself in grief and rage. The devil had found his conscience, and his conscience had found her heart's true north in the most unlikely of places, in the arms of a redeemed pirate who called her his compass and meant it with every breath in his body. Whatever judgment awaited them in Charleston, they would face it together, guided not by the cruel winds of vengeance, but by the steady direction of love and the unshakable belief that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to choose it.